Good day to everybody. This is our second video introducing the Shatterheart TTRPG system. We'll explain the basic game mechanics and in terms of success rolls and how the key parameters that affect those success rolls, such as character attributes. Now it's a D20 system. It's a roll over system. Let me grab my big D20 dice. Okay, well the because it uses bounded accuracy, the to succeed levels, which is equivalent to a difficulty check, are fairly standard per level. So, for example, a difficult TS would be 16, whether you're level 1 or level 20. Though level 20, you're likely to have a few tricks to make it easier. But you'll also, if you're fighting monsters, they may have defenses that make it harder as well. So a number of fairly standard numbers go up in even levels, and it's up to the GM to set a TS level depending on the circumstances that they see fit. For combat, we have a number of standard TS levels. For example, it's easier to hit with a one-handed weapon than a two-handed weapon, but a two-handed weapon is likely to do more damage and have a greater reach, and it's harder still to have to hit with a range weapon. Now you note these are standard numbers. They don't depend on armor class or armor category in the system, and that's one of the great advantages of it. It allows us to vary the degree of success based on the difficulty of the type of weapon. For example, it's often far too easy to hit with ranged weapons in most games. If you're beyond point blank range, it's really hard. You have to be really skilled to hit with a ranged weapon. There's of course, great advantages of hitting with ranged weapon in keeping your opponent at bay. Rather, armor affects damage. It's what's called an ablative system. Separate video will discuss about weapon categories and armor categories and how they interact to give a damage dice. Separate video. Now, one of the key things is it's a roll once system. What we call the roll once system, ROLE, every pun intended, which means that if it's your turn, you roll the D20 dice once. Key rule in the game is you only roll when the GM says so. You don't just grab a dice and roll it, which is chaos often in Dungeons and Dragons. So it's your turn, make your own roll. So it's a bit loud. This big pink dice. Now, the key thing about that one roll is you reuse any roll throughout your turn for everything. Now, for example, let's say you're trying to throw off a condition of being poisoned, taking poison every time on your turn. Now, there's often confusion in many games. You roll these saving throws at the beginning of your turn, at the end of the turn. It's often all over the place. In roll one, because it's a roll once per turn system, you roll at the beginning of your turn. So let's say you have a TS 14 to throw off perpetual or persistent poison damage, and you roll, I will cheat here, let's say you roll 20, so you've succeeded on that roll. That 20 you can reuse on your attack. So you think, wow, I can really go for it now because I know I'm going to hit. And because you roll once, you don't have the delay of, let's say, you're a high-level fighter, level 15 with three, they're warriors in the game, 3 attacks in the Dragons. Or you roll 3 times, you have to work out which dice is which for which weapon. You roll once. And because, in this case you got a 20, so you're very likely to score a critical hit. 20 is an automatic critical hit, but because you operate a degree of success system, for every 5 above the succeed number, you get a critical critical 1 for 5 above, critical 2 for 10 above, critical 1 you double damage, critical 2 you triple damage, so it's critical number one, -1 is the multiplier for your base damage. Hit much more. If it's equal to your to succeed number, and it's to succeed, to spellcast, to skill, everything is with an S, then it's half. Equal to or 1 over the TS number is what's called a glancing blow, or otherwise a partial success. It's half. If you roll 5 under or worse, or a natural 1 in any other circumstance, it's always a critical failure. So if you roll a natural 20, it's always a critical success. Um, or strictly speaking, it increases the degree of success by 1. So if it's within the normal range of a to succeed number between 2 and 18, 20 for exceptionally difficult tasks. Anything above a 20 can only be done by a superhuman. Um, then it will automatically save. Otherwise, it'll just increase the degree of success by 1. So if it's a really difficult role that you can't do, otherwise then rolling a 20 will just make it a normal hit rather than a critical success. So that's a nuance there, but it's a nuance. Normally 1 hits, 20 hits, 5 more is critical success level. 5 under is a critical failure level of 1. So that's the way the degree of success system works, and you use the degree of success system um, to resolve most issues that are risky and have some consequences of failure. If there's no risk and there's no consequences, there's no point in having a roll, you know. uh, if you're just messing around with your friends on something, don't need a success roll. If you read a book yesterday and want to recall who the main character is, you don't have to roll a memory check or whatever. You automatically succeed. If you're searching, you're spending 2 hours searching a room, you'll succeed if you have long enough. Time tension might be more difficult. So it's only when there's some degree of jeopardy do you roll. Um, and we operate the falling forward system. So let's say you're trying to detect secret entrance to a dungeon. You fail. You can only try twice in the system, and you get a bonus, what's called a buff, if on the second chance. You fail. What? You go home, go back to the tavern. You fail. You don't find the dungeon. The GM's taken 2 weeks to design it. We have a falling forward system, which means you succeed, but with consequences. For example, you see a rabbit go down a hole. What do you do? Is it big enough for the gnome to go down? Do you have an enlarge reduce spell, reduce in this case, to squeeze down it? Do you blow a hole up with your goblin grenades? Possibilities are endless. Um, do you put your rat down? The outlaw puts his rat down and wiggles through and lifts his nose up to the latch. Endless possibilities. By falling forward, you introduce interesting narrative and story elements without the game grinding to a halt. So of course, you just not just raw dice numbers. Um, they're modifiers. Now the key one is we operate from D&D 5th edition, the equivalent of advantage hindrance system. Sorry, the advantage disadvantage system. We call in the game the edge hindrance system. Now, why we call it edge hindrance is it's slightly different. So, well, of course, the great benefit or advantage, every pun intended, of the advantage and disadvantage system is it keeps the maths flat. So you can have standard TS numbers. Whereas if you're adding, 8, 12, 15, if you're level 15 in Pathfinder to your role, it takes it out of that normal range. So the great advantage in the advantage disadvantage system in terms of keeping the maths flat. Thing that everybody complains about it is if you have advantage twice, you only apply advantage once, and that's justified to a degree because it stops you seeking multiple tactical advantages. So from Dragonbane, if you've got double advantage, you roll 2d6s plus a 1d6 for the second advantage, or 2 if you've got 3 advantages, and they're added. If you've got hindrances of 2, you'll roll 1d6, 2, take the lowest number of the d20s and take away the 1d6, and so on and so forth. And that really gives you advantage, really gives you an incentive to stack up. And because you're only rolling once, you're not rolling 3 times, 4 times for multiple attacks at higher levels. It really gives you, you really want to stack up. You want to add an aid, you want to add a bless. At higher levels in D&D, there's no point in having an aid and bless or whatever, because you're already likely to have advantage from your weapon proficiency or whatever. So this really allows that greater width of experience and tactical play in order to stack them up. You've got to kill the monster this turn, otherwise they'll kill you next turn. So yeah, we got to succeed. We got to add, 3, 4 levels of success, of edge to the roll in order to make sure we succeed, and we succeed by a significant number for +5, +10, +15 to really whammy with the damage, and this can be very exciting. I mean, there are small modifiers, what we call buffs and disses, for changes to the roll that aren't worth the full +4, +5 on average. Excuse me, have a sip of wine here. Got a frog in my throat. Frog and moth in my throat by the sound of it. Um, Flanking or ganging up, for example, is +2, and there are a few other minor ones, such as from a aid spell or a bless or whatever, that um, um, that you add modifiers. But most of the time, you're just adding edges and hindrances rather than having these small modifiers. You have to remember a whole range of small modifiers, other than flanking and ganging up. That's the one that always comes up all the time. Um, So that's the basic dice mechanic. Fairly simple overall and fairly familiar. We don't have any complex systems like dice pools, and it has a great deal of flexibility and a great deal of narrative. Critical failures only have problems for characters if the rules say so. Most of the time they won't. For spells, however, the spell fizzles out, you can't cast it until you've had a long rest without certain divine intervention. So we don't have a Vanity magic system, we'll have another separate system on that. We have a mana-based system, but you can forget spells. This is from Shatterheart, of course, and it's a great system. It means that you really need to be not overuse your bam 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 highest level spells. You save those for the big bads unless you're really up against it, and that's helped, of course, by the focus, the mana based point resource system that we use. Now there are modifiers for level, proficiency, and attributes. Start with attributes. There are only 4 attributes in the game. We want to simplify it. And for each of those 4 attributes, we have an attribute modifier. The attribute modifier adds a modifier from your level. So your attribute plus your modifier from your level is your attribute modifier, and it's your attribute modifier that you modify rolls with. Never attributes directly. I don't actually use attributes directly in the game, other than for modifying certain base stats on your character sheet. So let's go through the 4 attributes. And I think they're certainly of equal value in the game. That's because we've made sure in the game mechanic, although, for example, if you're an outlaw, equivalent of a rogue or a thief in other games, JOCK is your main attribute, but it could be any one of the 4, and you just use different tactics depending on any one of the 4. You could be one that uses your charisma, what we call RIZZ in the game to jokes and insults, swearing, and all these other things to affect outcomes. That depends, depending on what attribute you put your maximum in, that will affect your style of play and your abilities and so on. So let's go through the four attributes. You've seen, they're all four letters and are fairly catchy. I think we have the best attributes of any game. They're beef, jock, geek, and Riz, and they're pretty self-explanatory. Ask any Gen Zer what Riz means, and you'll get an answer. So beef is your swarthiness, and that adds damage to your main bulky weapons, and to your squish points. We have squish points in the game, not hit points. Um, we have target. Sorry, we have jock, which affects your ability to hit with a ranged weapon, and also your ability to get out of the way when you're on guard against attacks and defending actively against them. You have geek, which is your knowledge, and we have Riz, which is kind of your mental strength and strength of character. And I said each of those four has an attribute modifier linked to it. So, for example, for Jock, it's target. For beef, it's brawn. Um, for geek, it's resolve. And for Riz, it's Odyle, Odyle, which is an old English word. It means kind of your resolution. I don't know its etymology, but it's a great word. Now, to get your attribute modifiers, you simply add your attribute to your level modifier. So let's go through them. The attributes are all arranged -2 to +4 for humans, and they're direct numbers. They're not derived numbers. Like the modern gameplay system, you use direct numbers rather than derived numbers, like Pathfinder Second Edition. Great remaster. Um, um, and your level modifier, 0 at level 1, level 2 is +1, level 4 is +2, etc., all the way up to +5. Then you have skills all the way from untrained at -2 to legendary at +4. So all three together are up to 14, and then you might gives you um, +1, 2, 3. 3 is rare. 4 is exceptionally rare for magic items. So that kind of restricts the range in the bounding active system. It flattens the math. They matter, but they are flattened. So it's about 1/3 of level is equal to the level bonus, and so on and so forth. Um, um, and you basically, for each of the skills in the system, it has an attribute modifier, sometimes two, that you use. So if you've got two, let's say brawn and jock for athletics, use the higher of the two and add it to your baseline skill level. So if you're an expert in a skill, which is +2, and you have a +3 in your beef and a +2 in your jock. Use +3, so that's a total of +5. So that's a real advantage. It's an increase of 25% overall in your dice range to hit, and you probably increase the degree of success by 1. So that basically is how the core mechanic system works with the character attributes. I recommend the first thing you do with a character is choose your class, and then you choose what kind of character broadly in that class you want to be, and then you choose your attributes accordingly. So, for example, you're being a paladin. Your paladin, you either have one that focuses on fighting. You can have a swashbuckling which is beef, probably your highest attribute. Could be kind of swashbuckling paladin. Why not? which case JOCK is the highest. It could be one that uses their intelligence, um, 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 tactically guiding other players, which case you put GEEK first, or it could be one that relies on your force of personality and charisma to convert, in which case you put RIZZ first. So I think for all classes, that you could have valid builds with having any of the attributes as maximum. Some will be more optimal than others, but we've deliberately designed so there are abilities that can be used in combat all the time for one of those four. You know, you could be a character that specializes in getting out of the way, then doing a riposte kind of swashbuckler tactic. So you're not relying so much on your strength, but on your jock ability. So we really wanted to make the four attributes fairly equal in importance. And then you had real choice in where you put your highest attribute. Now we have a range system for choosing your attributes. So for example, that's +1, +2, naught and naught. That's a standard range. There are circumstances where you could have higher or lower, such as +1, +1, +1, 0. Or 2+2s, in which case you have to take some form of physical disadvantage, being one-eyed, colorblind, etc., peg leg, and you can have -1, a dump stat. I'm trying to avoid dump stats, so I don't have -1 as part of the range. But you could have -1, but the advantage is you have a expert in a skill, such as like an expert tracker, expert of perception, expert that in this what we call this perception and scouting skill. So there's really choices for you to adjust what range you use depending on your backstory. Discuss it with your GM. Uh, but they're not extreme with lots of big dump stats because we want to kind of avoid min-maxing. We want optimizing, not min-maxing. Optimizing a character based on your style of play and still make it viable. So it's still strongly possible for um, you know a character without high persuasion skill, without a high um, RIZZ to undertake a check to persuade somebody. And there might be circumstances where it's to your benefit to do so. Also, there might be circumstances whereby you agree with your DM on a one-off basis to use a different attribute modifier to what is normal. For example, romance and seduction is a great skill in the game. Um, we have a character that had his nose bitten off by a kobold, I think, and he wears a bucket round his head. But he's a renowned gladiator, and he was in an encounter with a princess that has a thing for gladiators, particularly gladiators with certain endowments, if you know what I mean. And agreed we would use at that circumstances where he demonstrated his strength to use his beef and brawn as the modifier to the romance and seduction check, um, rather than Odile. They had a fairly high Odile because they had the gift of the tongue, but it was one or two lower than it would have been because of the physical disadvantage. So they rolled at disadvantage on Odile checks because of their nose being cut off. An example of physical maladies adding character to from their backstory and being offset by other skills. For example, in this case, they learnt as a gladiator. So there's a huge scope for customizing characters. So that's the next step after choosing your class and broadly deciding what kind of character you want is then to choose um, the range of your attributes. And once you've chosen them, they're there until you advance in level to level 3. Then you have +1 to one of your attributes depending on your class. Um, uh, we don't modify attributes by lineage, race, because otherwise, why would a dwarf ever become a cleric? It really throws off balance if you do that. We're not going to use the first edition or original varying it by sex. Oh my God. It's still possible for a gnome to be a beefy gladiator they make up for their small size, with that degree of surprise of having somebody chopping their ankles off. Um, um, and we don't vary attributes through backstory. Backstory gives you skills, and if you're from a fishing village, you're likely to have skills such as swimming and sailing and so on, which have certain attribute modifiers that they depend on. So it's up to the character. It's up to the character to choose. You choose your attributes, then you choose your backstory and your class and so on, and you build it from there. We don't have this complex back and forth you do in 5th edition, 2024 edition, or Pathfinder and so on. I think Pathfinder has 3 levels of changes to attributes. You keep it simple, and you move forward as you go on. Okay, that's about it for today. In the next video, we'll talk about the character sheet and basically go through in more detail how you create a character, in particular in terms of introducing the classes, of all the steps in developing a character up to but not including the backstory and class. Okay, thank you very much, and we'll speak to you in the next video.